How do we achieve change and move forward? So to answer this, or try to, I'm joined by Soraya McDonald, senior culture writer for ESPN's The Undefeated. Rachel Giza is editor-at-large at Chatelaine, and Patricia Rozema is a Canadian filmmaker. Welcome, all of you. Patricia, you've worked with Harvey Weinstein. You've been in the industry for a long time. What is it about Hollywood that makes this endemic still?
Well, it's a trade in charisma, and it's a trade in sex appeal, and it's a trade in sort of all those intangible elements that, you know, it's very, very easy to cross the board, and especially in the movie business, it's a one-off business. They're pop-up corporations, so there's no accountability. So you don't have somebody sort of making sure that office practices are proper. So
it's power too.
It's, oh my goodness, it's a huge amount of power, and this man wielded so much power. I think he was actually on the wane. We'll know there's real change when one of the real big players, and there are serious players there now who have just as bad rumors as Harvey did, swirling about them, but nobody's taking them down because there's too much money at stake.
Soraya, this isn't confined only to Hollywood or movies. We know, we've seen it in other industries. How have any of those previous cycles changed anything?
Well, I think we've certainly seen change since 1991 when Anita Hill came forward during Justice Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearings. And even though he was seated on the Supreme Court, that certainly changed our understanding here of the nature of what sexual harassment is and how pervasive it is, and I think has provided the sort of environment and understanding for women to come forward now with these allegations.
Rachel, do you think it's changing?
I mean, I think the fact that that Weinstein is experiencing some consequences for what he's done in terms of being fired from his company. He was just kicked out of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts, which is more of a symbolic thing. But I think the fact that that there is a penalty, there are lots of men who've been accused of these sorts of things in the past who've continued to have flourishing careers. The fact that this seems to be coming at a time, I think, after Trump, after Cosby, after Roger Ailes, after Bill O'Reilly, where I think that there is a sense of women feeling more emboldened and empowered when they speak out. I think they also feel more likely that they will be heard now. I don't know if that changes things, but I think it certainly opens up the conversation at least.
Patricia, what do you think on that? Is this a watershed moment? I mean, nobody admits to doing this until they're outed.
I pray this is there'd be a tsunami of allegations, of not against Harvey. I would love for people to, and men have to stand up, right? Because men become complicit. Silence is complicity if they don't stand up and they know things. It's a very, very difficult thing in our culture. We have rumors, but we don't know where to go with the rumors. If we can't actually make a case against them that will stand up in court, it's quiet. So there has to be some kind of system where people can speak of these rumors, because these young women, almost always young women, who have no connections and no power, are preyed upon. I'm sure there's a lot of agents and casting directors who have something they're accountable as well.
There was also young women involved in aiding and abetting this happening, and I understand it's a power relationship, but is there work that we have to do, Rachel, on giving younger women the voice to say, you can't do that, or I'm not going to be part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I also think it comes to not letting this become normalized. I mean, I think that there is a culture where the hypersexualization of women, where turning a professional meeting into some sort of power play and power dynamic becomes seen as something that's sort of natural and normal in these interactions. And so I think that's why, you know, people get away with being seen as, oh, he's just a dirty old man, that he's just like that. And so I think it's not just sort of empowering the people who are complicit to speak out, but I think more broadly in our culture to not have this be a normal part of how men behave, or something that's seen as just kind of part of masculinity.
Patricia, break in there.
Yeah, sorry. I hate to see these young assistants getting it in the neck for this.
Yeah.
It's not their fault. Yeah. And I actually happen to know a little bit about how the Miramax offices ran, and lots of people worked very, very closely with Harvey, and they weren't in the room. They thought maybe there was, you know, consensual stuff going on, but they weren't, like, let's not put it on them. Let's put it on people who were above him who knew about settlements, like board members. Let's put it on
the
people
board
who bankrolled his company and knew about it. Let's put it where the blame where it belongs, and with Harvey, you know.
Put it with the power. Soraya,
and with other men who knew, but I feel like there's just a little bit of a sort of kicking down that can happen in a case like this that I hate to see.
Soraya, are we responsible for enabling this kind of behavior in some way, as we've been talking about?
I think as a culture, certainly we're responsible in that we live we live in a culture that is racist and sexist and misogynist, and that's what we see bubbling up when incidents like this finally make their way to the foreground. I think what we have here is really a textbook case that allows us to understand how institutionalized sexism functions, to the point that, as your guest was saying before, we see, you know, Harvey basically had clauses in his contract that allowed for him to continue working at Miramax and the Weinstein Company, despite the fact that there were these allegations against him, as long as he was raking in the money and the Oscar nominations, and he was paying off these women. You know, there was this idea that this was simply okay, which is just unacceptable.
So on that point, Patricia, I mean, it is a case that's being sort of forensically looked at, and we do learn quite about institutionalizing and turning a blind eye. So in your industry and others, how do we move forward now that we know more? Every day we know a little bit more.
No meetings alone. Nobody in the whole system should allow young women to be, you know, taken to hotel rooms with any man. It just can't. And no one should be leaving a meeting with him. And actually, there is a little bit. Young women have to speak up right away. I think there's a terrible thing that women, when something shameful happens to them, they actually think that they are somehow they're shamed, and they're not. It's just it should rest with the other guy, not with them. So they have to speak out. And social media is great. Say it, say it, say it, say it. There has to be a lot of noise, and don't worry about being rude. So many young people, women, say it, and often and loud and from the hilltops.
Soraya, what do you think? What are some of the other solutions, even, you know, attacking it from the top where it's happening?
Sure. So I think while it's certainly important for women to speak up, and young women, we have to create a climate in which they feel safe doing that. If your livelihood depends on you being complicit somehow, and you're not necessarily making that much money in the first place, if you're just an assistant working in one of these offices, you know, that's not really fair to them, especially since, you know, Harvey Weinstein was one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. And if he said, you're never going to work in this town again, you know, he could actually back that up. One of the things that I would like to see, I think, is I wish an institution like the Motion Picture Academy would actually hold studios to some sort of standards and say, look, you know, at least 50% of your board needs to be made up of women. You can't really have this sort of just institutionalized male power within Hollywood and expect this problem to just go away.
Rachel, how would you create a climate, or how would you suggest that we create a climate where women can say, and feel safe, and group people around them to give them courage?
I think it starts by telling men and boys this behavior is unacceptable, and saying that as well, because I think that, again, this has become kind of a normal part of our culture, and it shouldn't be normal. I think that we need to start educating boys and young men about consent early on. We need to have more education in workplaces, at schools, as part of industries, so that this behavior is not reliant on women having to speak out all the time, but men actually changing their behavior, men actually behaving appropriately.
Patricia?
And it's extremely important. Soraya is saying that women are in these sort of leadership positions and are designing the, this sounds like self-interest, but I really do think, men are creating the images of women, and they're creating all the female characters that everyone is just kind of inhaling innocently and accepting that this is what women are like. But women need to be behind the camera in order to present sort of more powerful figures of women, flawed everything, but there have to be more women in positions of power. 4% of the films in Hollywood were directed by women. 4%. What's that about? Men aren't better storytellers. What's that about?
We're wrapping up here, but Patricia, I just wanted to ask you, because you are part of this community, has the Weinstein story changed Hollywood?
I know a lot of women and actors, female actors, coming to me and saying, I know 100 stories like this. I just thought that was the business. It's ridiculous what people will accept. I do feel, and people writing op-eds, and I've been helping some people with them, and there's a wish to change things, and a hope that this might be a transitional moment. I don't know. It's going to be glacial, but it's let's.
I was with you there, being hopeful for a moment.
Okay,
but glacial is too long.
I'll leave on a hopeful note. Let's just do that.
All right, ladies. Thank you very much for joining me this evening.